Story 1. Grew up in a religious community, felt very close to right-leaning ideology. In college during ethics, philosophy, and debate classes, where you read both sides of an argument and then write your own arguments for or against an issue, I always felt the classes were unfair. Why did the liberal sides always get good and logical sources, while the only sources for the more conservative ideas were based on thin emotional arguments? Clearly, since many of my family and friends held conservative views and were logical and ethical people, there had to be logical and ethical arguments for their ideas. This led me to think maybe the professors were biased. I went to the library to search for better right-sided arguments. When I couldn't find any philosophy that stood up to the logic, ethics, and data of the liberal side, I slowly began to realize my community, might collectively hold conservative beliefs because they set up a group whose membership was conditional on believing those things, such as the church, and that they did not really have any other reason to believe what they did. Story 2. I used to believe, for the majority of my life, that politics only served to divide and diminish the population. I thought it was a platform orchestrated by the powerful to control the weak, and that the world politicians lived in was completely separate from the one I knew. Therefore, I considered it invalid and not worth my time or effort. However, as I have learned to pay more attention to politics and have seen how decisions in one place can affect change elsewhere, both good and bad, I realized that, despite much of my initial skepticism being somewhat true, it is more reason to take action and create change in my own part of the world. To work with others to do the same elsewhere and to stand against those who would see us divided and conquered. It is a much more difficult path to walk, often disheartening, but it is worth it. Story 3. I was a conservative into my early 20s. Watching the Republican Party fight so hard against the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, flipped a switch for me. They were fighting against giving people basic health care. That has always been unforgivable to me. Story 4. Empathy and data. When I was younger, I tried to be a centrist and independent. As I got older, I met many people from different walks of life. I traveled and examined data about the effectiveness of various policies. I am only becoming more progressive as I age. Story 5. I saw that people who claimed to hold strong Christian values actually held nothing at all. The shameless cruelty from the political right is disgusting, so I no longer believe they have the ability to tell anyone how anything should be done. Whatever vile thing appeals to right-wing supporters about the criminals and psychopaths they empower, I cannot understand. I was raised in the Carolinas and attended church twice a week. I am now a bleeding heart socialist. Story 6. I was involved in the Tea Party movement until I realized that it was not about freedom for citizens and accountability for politicians as much as it was about obstructionism and right-wing extremism, the forerunner to make America great again. Story 7. I was a poor boy in a deindustrialized town. Family permanently flat broke. No clue what to do with my life. I didn't have much of a political bent at all. I figured whatever was current must be working fine. Since I had no idea, I joined business school, naively thinking that I could stop being poor. Each lecture was about the dehumanization of people in the name of profit. I swallowed a lot of it and threw my hands up, thinking if that's what it takes, I guess. By the second semester, I was miserable. One night, my marketing lecturer said, "If you are marketing controversial items, such as sexy clothing for 10-year-olds, run it by accounting first to make sure it's worth the hassle." That absolutely broke me. I could not do it. I cannot overstate how totally it shattered my apathetic worldview. I dropped out and started reading more widely. I am now a passionate activist who believes landlords should be held accountable. I spend a lot of time helping people fight exploitation by making sure they know their rights. Story 8. Job change to a place in the Deep South. I went from center-right to far left in a heartbeat after realizing what they were really like. Story 9. With age, I stopped looking at what politicians are promising and started looking at what they actually deliver. Talk and promises are cheap, and anyone can make them nowadays. Story 10. I have been voting for the Democratic Party since I voted for Barack Obama in 2012 and generally believed that Democrats were good and wanted to help people. Learning that Democrats widely voted to fund a genocide in Gaza under President Joe Biden, and learning about the cruelty imposed on Palestinians living in Gaza by Israel, how long that cruelty has been going on, and about the Nakba was a real wake-up call for me. It has made me more selective in who I choose to support. That knowledge has guided me to support progressive Democratic Party members like Summer Lee, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and Zoran Mamdani, people who fight for universal healthcare, marijuana legalization, police reforms, and more domestically, while also working to end support for genocidal governments like Israel and striving to bring peace and cooperation between all nations of the world. Story 11. Raised on the hard right by Christian parents. Went to college and had a professor teach us about greenhouse gases. Then we did a number of experiments, and I discovered that the issue is real. It is provably real with science and not just some political token. That one lie by the right led me to investigate what else they were lying about. Story 12. It has been a slow progression towards leftist radicalization the more I understand the world, society, and the economy. I started fairly centrist, with a mindset of leaving minorities alone while thinking most politics was pointless. Now I realize just how much everyone's daily life is affected, even at a macro level. Story 13. Lived in a house where Fox News was on the kitchen television nonstop. I would literally come down for a snack or some water in the middle of the night sometimes, and Fox News was on. I had been questioning for a long time, but I walked into the kitchen and saw Leila Alcorn's story. I burst into tears. I thought, yeah, I am transgender. I thought, these people want me dead. Watching someone fight against your right to exist will really radicalize you. Story 14. I should start by saying that my beliefs are far to the left of any center-left political party. However, the parties closer to my beliefs all have deal-breaking policies that prevent me from voting for them. So I vote center-left to support some form of progressive government. My family were Catholic conservatives, so I initially followed them. Coming out was difficult, and once I questioned the idea of finding a wife and having 6 to 10 kids, other beliefs were also challenged. But I won't claim to have completely left those values behind, nor my family. Education helped a lot. Attending a great public high school and earning a college degree. Moving to Canada helped even more. Canada has had a spectrum of parties in its parliament for years. When I fell in love with a Canadian and he could not sponsor me for residence, my Tory member of parliament's office was polite but ineffective. His new Democratic Party Socialist member of parliament got us on the national news and facilitated a group human rights complaint. In a very Canadian way, the human rights officials effectively said, "You are right, we need to change this. Please stay in Canada." Even then, I went further. I read 95% of the Bible. Our faith was focused on the extreme writings of the first Apostle Paul rather than anything Jesus was said to have actually said. I tried other less doctrinaire denominations, but they were weak. I looked at Judaism, but the practice of circumcision seemed archaic. By the way, I am already circumcised. I even read the Book of Mormon. Who needs hallucinogens when that is your primary text? Now I teach at university and advocate for genuine pluralism, celebrating a range of perspectives and beliefs with a shared set of values. I argue on behalf of Muslim students who want to pray on campus and for queer students to be able to use their preferred names and pronouns. I encourage my students to focus on what they think rather than what they feel or believe. Not that feelings or beliefs are unimportant, they are, but because education is the practice of freedom, and it is in the interrogation of facts and feelings that liberation is found. Story 15. Actually getting negatively impacted by the politicians in power. Not the imagined issues that some people talk about, like the social justice agenda, but policies that affected me personally and millions of others around the country. Story 16. From apolitical to completely progressive. I know racism is real, but it is crazy to me how that person did that to a child. The child who could not fight back. Now she is a millionaire. It makes me very happy for mixed-race couples. Yes, stir the situation right up because it is sad as it is. Story 17. I grew up a socialist. I became more conservative, a left-leaning centrist, when I went to a very liberal college and was surrounded by the hysteria and irrationality of much of 2010s and 2020s progressivism. I still cannot believe my college required us to read and take seriously How to Be Anti-Racist, a book by an obvious grifter with as much intellectual value as an Alex Jones rant. Going back into the real world and seeing brutal inequalities in person pushed me a little more to the left again. Working at a job surrounded by supporters of former President Donald Trump who expressed misogynistic views all day was a big eye-opener, as was living in a much poorer part of the country than where I grew up. I would say I am a standard liberal Democrat. It is not that I disagree with the goals of leftists or progressives, but I think they are hopelessly out of touch, utopian, and ineffectual. Story 18. I have mental health challenges. I would not vote, but my country requires it. I am always changing my political views. Story 19. Today I learned that Donald Trump's deportation advisor Stephen Miller had a majority in this Reddit thread's journey, but in the opposite direction. He was raised in a completely progressive family and had a total switch in college. Story 20. When Donald Trump made fun of a reporter with a physical disability, I thought, this man is completely inappropriate and should not be president. I was not really following politics before that. Story 21. Leaving fundamentalist Christianity. Now that I was not taking direction from God, I did not feel compelled to hate whoever he did. Story 22. I went to college and met people who were different from me. My perspective shifted even more when I got engaged and realized how blissfully happy I was, while there were people who were not allowed to have what I was getting because the law said no, and it was for no good reason. Now I have daughters, and I want their rights and futures protected. I have not voted for the Republican Party since George H.W. Bush's first term, which was the first time I voted. I did not know how to vote, so I asked my dad. He said, "You vote for the Republican candidate. If there is no Republican candidate, you leave it blank." My father came from a wealthy family, but he wasted his opportunity, and we lived lower middle class. He is now retired and receives Medicare and Social Security. He has no 401k retirement plan. He has no reason to be so strongly Republican, and yet he voted for the Make America Great Again movement 3 times. My upbringing and breaking away from it is why my views changed. Story 23. Observing how the wealthy and influential have undermined every institution on the planet, and seeing their response to the COVID-19 pandemic, pushed me further left from liberalism and beyond capitalism. Watching the United States rapidly embrace authoritarianism also influenced my perspective. Story 24. I was told being gay was bad throughout my whole life. Someone asked me, "How is the gay couple in their homes affecting you as you stand here?" It was my first experience questioning what I knew. Then I was exposed to the world's suffering through first-hand experiences in the military. I have been a lover of people ever since. I am absolutely willing to help those in need and give a leg up to help level the playing field. Story 25. I cannot speak for myself, but my centrist brother became more liberal when the Make America Great Again movement started targeting transgender people. He is transgender. Republicans wanting him dead, jailed, or registered as a sex offender soured him on the turd sandwich versus giant douche viewpoint. The idea that both sides are bad does not apply if one is actively trying to hurt you. Story 26. After the invasion of Iraq and during Barack Obama's first term, when I saw the grand old party weaponize obstructionism against American healthcare and veterans as early as 2008, I knew my faith was in the wrong people. Every year since, those lunatics have done something to shoot themselves in the foot because they either hate women or hate brown people. Story 27. Monica missiles and Bill Clinton's impeachment. Also, the weaponization of almost everything. I appreciated that we had a balanced budget for Bill Clinton's last 2 years in office. I disliked that the Republicans ignored that to give tax breaks to the mega wealthy, disregarded advice about terrorism before September 11th, and then launched us into a voluntary war in Iraq. Now we have the current president. Need I say more? Story 28. I think time and introspection and Jonathan Stewart. You can only believe in small government for so long before you realize the Republican Party does not want it. Story 29. I grew up in a strict Christian religion and was quite conservative because it seemed like the right thing to do. Toward the end of high school and even more in college, I realized that my empathy and conservative values were clashing. I care deeply about other people's well-being and do not believe in laws that impose Christian values on everyone. You should be able to love who you love, be your true self, make your own choices regarding your body, and everyone should be given equal opportunities regardless of disability, gender, or national origin. Story 30. Reddit leftists. The political left is no longer basing its perspective on materialism. Somehow, it has become infested with idealism, in the formal meaning of both terms, which is religious thinking without gods. Story 31. When I saw how weak and ineffectual the Democrats were, it pushed me farther left and not identifying as much as a Democrat. More and more, they seemed to get more conservative and rarely did anything. All they managed to do was alienate their base and push many of them into the waiting arms of the Republican Party. I want politicians who fight hard for the things that are good and are not afraid to tell the opposition to go away, not ones who just keep their hands tied and do not want to rock the boat, all while taking corporate interest money like the ones across the aisle love to do. To sum it up more concisely, when I stopped feeling proud to be a Democrat and expected more from them than they were giving, that led to my political allegiance and views changing. Story 32. The situation with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris was disappointing. I voted for Joe Biden. I deeply regret it, and I am glad Kamala Harris did not win. Story 33. Raised on the hard left, I realized how unproductive politics are. I changed my views to be neutral on everything and only have opinions that affect me and my life. Story 34. Weirdly enough, it was wanting some long-format content to listen to while playing video games after work, which turned into learning about neoliberalism and the Reagan presidency. Story 35. I used to support Donald Trump during this election cycle until the Jeffrey Epstein case. Looking back, I should have realized the truth that many politicians in this country are corrupt and possibly involved in child abuse. Story 36. Studying economics and American political history. It is funny how most people use their feelings as justification for political views. Story 37. The first time, I decided to reject everything I had been taught. The second time, I observed the differences between the intent of government policies and the actual results. Story 38. Eyes open to the Democrats and liberals. Just wow. I also searched for the opposite side of the argument and watched both sides' opinions back and forth. Story 39. I was raised in a household where Ronald Reagan was revered. My parents were immigrants who truly believed in the idea of the American dream. In many ways, they achieved it. Both of them came from a poor country, but because they got educated and took advantage of the opportunities afforded to them, they were able to carve out a fairly comfortable middle-class lifestyle for themselves and their children. I grew up fairly right-wing conservative. I believed, and still largely do, that working hard, making the necessary sacrifices to take advantage of opportunities, and not complaining were keys to having a successful life. I was taught that if you are poor, it is because you are either lazy, unmotivated, or unwilling to commit to a lifestyle that facilitates getting a better job and a better position for yourself. As I have aged, my view has become more nuanced. I understand that there are historical reasons why an underclass exists, that the elites are not interested in actually elevating the best and brightest in our society as much as they are interested in maintaining their positions of privilege at all costs. I see how racism and classism are inextricably intertwined in our society and how, on a macro level, white people in America will never allow themselves to be pushed out of powerful positions without a literal fight. Hence the rise of Make America Great Again and the sheer hatred for anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I see how people of color, no matter how excellent, worthy, or patriotic they may be, will still be, in the eyes of many Americans, just another marginalized group. Story 40. Realizing that not only would the free market fail to fix the many crises we face today, but that it partly caused them. Story 41. My transgender friend and I talked about abortion, and they convinced me it was wrong. I then started doing more research. I was really liberal before, but according to my political compass test, I am almost exactly in the center. I lean more to the right than the left now, but that conversation was really the catalyst for when my political opinions started forming and changing. Story 42. I used to be quite liberal and still am in some ways, but I changed many of my opinions once gender ideology became very prominent. There are many aspects of that movement that do not make sense to me. I also dislike their cancel culture mentality, many of their feminist views, and the constant victimhood about everything. There is a lot of complaining. Also, open borders was an unusual stance. I do not mind immigrants, but completely open borders seemed unreasonable. I found that liberalism was not a party where varying beliefs were accepted. It was all or nothing. This pushed me away for the most part. I find the party really tough to be a part of, even though I do align on some issues. Story 43. I changed to the grand old party for good when I learned from David Stockman's book, Reagan Budget Director, how wasteful and ineffective government programs are. Medical care costs increased at about the same rate as inflation before Medicare was passed in 1965, but after that, the costs rose 4 to 5 times higher than the Consumer Price Index for many years. Respectfully, liberal people base opinions on emotions and what ought to be in the name of fairness. Conservatives base opinions on facts. Story 44. Talking with a very conservative friend, who I think is really smart, and having a stock portfolio has made me more conservative on economic issues. My religious conversion, becoming a Christian, also made me much more conservative on social issues. Story 45. Just growing up and experiencing other people's views. I grew up in an extremely conservative background. My whole family supports former President Donald Trump. I just cannot see how they are okay with any of those views anymore. Maybe it is because they have all lived in the same place their entire lives, or maybe they are just unpleasant people. Who honestly knows? Story 46. Losing my religion and rebuilding my moral philosophy on a foundation of empathy and fairness, rather than obeying a set of arbitrary rules dictated by a deity. After that, I realized I could no longer agree with anything the right stood for and have voted Democrat ever since. This was around Bush's second term, to give some context. I have become increasingly left-wing and more opposed to what the right has become than ever before. Story 47. I would have considered myself more left-leaning, but after constant terrorist attacks and multiple weekly headlines reporting stabbings by a certain group, I decided I could no longer support this and moved toward a more centrist political view. I agreed with many others that we needed to stop open borders. Story 48. I went through a libertarian phase in my 20s. What turned me towards becoming more progressive is seeing what libertarians are actually like. They do not care about freedom. They do not mind fascism as long as it facilitates xenophobia, worker exploitation, misogyny, and removing the age of consent. That last one is a strangely significant issue for them. Oh, and they like marijuana. Story 49, the first Trump administration, but this second one is causing a lot of distrust in Democratic legislators and the justice system because of the actions of the executive branch. My only hope is that we realize the two-party system is no longer working. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.